All right, so we're live now. Um, Very excited to have you on here, Leland. We've known each other for a long time. We've been family friends since since Zoe, my younger sister, was in first grade. That was when she was in the same grade as your older brother, Greer. Our families kind of linked up then and
Wow, you
gone
did
on
some research
countless
on
trips.
this.
Oh yeah,
I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah, that was how it all
Did you ask
went
your
down.
sister when the exact day was that that we crossed paths?
I just remember
Yeah.
I remember just Zoe was in Greer's grade, and then I was on soccer teams with Greer in lower school, and so that's how I kind of got closer with you. And then since you were in Maggie's grade, my other sister,
Yeah.
yeah, our parents just linked up at the parent teacher days, and we ended up being family friends.
Yeah.
And you were always a little younger than me. You're, I think, 3 years behind me in school. So growing up, we were always friends, but I think once we started getting older, into high school and beyond, then we really started getting closer because our interests, I think, in a lot of ways are aligned.
Mhm.
We're into a lot of the same niche things, and I mean, some of my niche interests that just came directly from you. We'll get into them, but
Yeah.
yeah, that's one of the reasons I wanted to have you on this podcast, is since you have very in-depth knowledge about your interests. And just to kind of preface it, we'll dive deeper in, but you've traveled the world, you've studied different languages, you're fluent in French, you're highly competitive in memory competitions. You're really at that top level, doing your memory stuff. You have a memory business, so you're in the entrepreneur world as well. You've done other business things as well. You compete in chess. I know you're studying chess all the time, and you're a fitness freak. I consider myself a bit of a fitness enthusiast, and you're the main person that I'll never be able to keep up with, that I've trained with. It's pretty humbling. Usually I'm the one kind of feeling like people are trying to catch up with me, and it's the flip side when I work out with you. So yeah, you've really kind of reached heights in your interest, and so that's why I wanted to have you on. But yeah, so thanks for being here today, man.
Thank you for stoking my ego right there, man. I think I just sign off this podcast. I'm ready to go for the day. All right. I feel like I need to introduce you to get you up a little bit. Well, I'm super stoked now, man. Obviously, that's great to hear. Yay, Leland. Yeah, obviously. It's been great knowing you all these years and overlapping in all these interests in fitness and entrepreneurship, and generally kind of swimming against the tide with our own interests and our own philosophies. And I'm excited to talk about all of that with you today. Yeah. And I'm excited to get into it. And I'm glad that we both have knowledge about these things and we can kind of share our thoughts and experiences.
Yeah, man. I really like that phrase you used, swimming against the tide. I'm not sure when, but I'm sure that phrase will come back to relevancy in this conversation. All right. So what I like to do is I want to, just since not everyone who watches this knows you, obviously. So I want to kind of set the context for your life. Obviously pretty similar to mine. We went to the same school, and, we knew each other growing up and all that, but can you just kind of give the elevator version of your background, where you're from, and yeah, just what it was like for you growing up, kind of what your family was like, yeah, just dive in a little bit there.
Sure, yeah. So I grew up in Baltimore, Maryland, and I have a wonderful family and a brother, older brother. My upbringing was very hands-off. My parents are entrepreneurs, and they're very supportive of me doing pretty much anything. They actually have had a bunch of businesses throughout life, and they've always been kind of thinking off the beaten path. So I definitely got some of that from them. I went to school in Baltimore, during which time I would say, more than other kids, I spent a lot of my efforts on things that didn't have anything to do with school, or extracurricular activities. I spent most of my time learning actually outside of school, watching Khan Academy videos, reading books, like learning my own things.
Can you list out some
starting
of your
businesses?
Can you list out some of your interests? I know like parkour. You had it's still kind of a thing, but there was like a phase where that was like the thing.
I've had a bunch of interests. Yeah, I would
Can you name a
say
few?
interest is like too light. I would say I had like full-on obsessions, usually between 3 and 6 months long, and then I would like never do it again sometimes. So when I was 8, I was really into investing, and I was into that for like 3 or 4 years. I bought every book I could. I bought Securities Analysis by Benjamin Graham. I bought like, The Intelligent Investor. And I actually went to my first shareholders meeting in Omaha and saw Buffett speak.
I didn't know that.
Back when I was like 9 years old, I would like waited all night to go in and stuff. So I had some strange hobbies. I got really interested in that. And then a couple of years later, I was like not into that as much. And then I got really into parkour and free running. And so I was like stealing all the leaf bags from like my neighbors so I could have like a crash pad. I was doing flips and stuff. So I was really into that, and also just various businesses I've always been into. One of the first things that I did, okay, this is actually kind of a funny story, is I don't know if this technically counts as a business, but my friend Ben and I found out that on the Coke caps, they have My Coke Rewards, like a little code you can scan, and then you can redeem these points for like real rewards online, like an iPod or like T-shirt or like a speaker system. And I think one of the first entrepreneurial activities that I remember doing was outside of friend's school, our school, we would go on recycling day and we would collect thousands of these bottle caps for the My Coke Rewards points. And then we would scan them. And then like most people would have like, like 100 or 200 My Coke Rewards points from like drinking Coke over the course of years. And I had like 50,000. And I've been buying like iPods on My Coke Rewards, and like in their system online, they must have thought like this guy's gonna die of some like diabetes based on the number of My Coke Rewards points he has. So that was a hilarious little story. I know you're looking for like kind of like a broad brush of things that I would
I like
do.
The specifics help. Like
that's like the specific one too. Yeah. I also had a lawn care business when I was younger, Lee's Lawn Care. And what I did was my friend Zach and I got him involved and a couple other people involved. And basically, we found out that people who have lawn care companies go after these big contracts where they have, like a mile of land to mow, because then they can charge a monthly rate and they can charge a lot for it. So usually they want to get a contract with a school to like take care of a school's property. And so I didn't do that because I was like, I can't compete with my lawnmower like against somebody that has like a $5,000 lawnmower. So what I did was I went to Hamden, which if you've ever been to Hamden, you know that they don't really have yards. Their yards are like the size of a swimming pool, like a small pool.
Yeah, and just for viewers, it's kind of like townhouse neighborhoods.
Yeah, exactly. And so that also means that they don't own lawnmowers and their yards look terrible. And a lot of them are older, so they're not mowing it. So what I did was I would go to people and I'd be like, hey, look, I can mow your lawn for you and I will charge you like $20, which was a lot less than one of these companies would charge, and none of them would actually do it or like do a good job. And so I got somebody to say yes. They're like, yeah, sure, do this. So the first time I went through, mow the lawn, with my little push mower or whatever, and I get the $20. I'm like, all right, thank you. And then I go to their next door neighbor and I give them the same deal. And I mow it, I get the $20. I'm like, all right, thank you. And then eventually I get the entire block of houses in Hampton. And I'm like making all this money because their lawns are so tiny. It takes me like 30 seconds to just mow the lawn. And after a while, I was like, well, I bet I could get even faster at this. And so I ended up hitting every single house in the span of like 2 hours. And I'd make like $600 in like 2 hours because each one I'd be like $20, $20. And then I was like, I started to get creative. I was like, well, I'm not gonna use this push mower anymore. I'm gonna get like a real like legit mower where I can do this even faster. And so I got to the point where I just go in. It literally took me like 20 seconds to do each lawn. I just ride the little mower down this tiny lawn, and then I go to the next one, go in and out. And I was just like a factory. And so that was like a kind of an interesting entrepreneurship thing of like, look for the customers that no one else will take for some reason and find a way to make it profitable. And so I was the guy that did small lawns.
Yeah. Small and bottle caps, Coke bottle caps too. The discarded the goods that no one wants.
Things that people, and that was also kind of my investing strategy when I was younger and really into investing. I remember one of the companies I made the most money off of was one that actually like liquidated completely. And I basically found out that in their agreements and through doing a ton of reading and research that even if they like weren't profitable, if they liquidated, they were still gonna like make a net gain for their shareholders just by liquidating all their assets. And so I remember investing in this company, and it just looked terrible. Like all the news was just terrible about it. And then eventually it was like, all right, we're just gonna like sell everything. And I made like 4 times my initial investment, but it was like the company was like a failed company. So that was another one. But they just had a lot of like assets to sell off, and they gave priority to like paying their shareholders with those proceeds. So that was another example of something that like looks really bad on the surface, but maybe isn't actually that bad when you go down into the actual specifics of it. And kind of the willingness to kind of sit with the discomfort of the bad press.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And then
so those are some things that I had done at the time. Also, I guess a couple other things just to like round out my perspective so that the audience doesn't think I'm just like collecting bottle caps and mowing lawns. I also have done a lot of traveling. That's something that's very important to my family. We took a year off of school, actually, 7th grade. So kind of the best year to miss the 7th grade. And we traveled the world, and that was a big one. And I also, I've written a children's book as well. And I have just a lot of interests. Like, I guess that's kind of the main theme. And some of them were related to school, but most of them were just kind of following my own passions and interests.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Gotcha. And that's really one of the reasons I wanted to have this conversation with you recorded is a lot of the guests I have are people who've kind of swim against the tide and pursue their own interests, even though they're sort of directed into the collective interests. Cool. And so one memory is a big thing for you. That's kind of, I would say, your main thing now. When did you start memory training? Just in that whole, you kind of laid out, you were doing parkour and you were traveling in middle school, and then you started this lawn care business, and you were kind of done investing by this time. And when did memory kind of come into the picture in the timeline?
Yeah, so memory came into the picture in 8th grade.
8th grade.
So after I got back from my world trip, and I had been kind of in a lot of niche interest areas. So unsurprisingly, I found another niche that I would be fascinated with. And I went to the USA Memory Championship, and I saw all these people competing, and I didn't I wasn't competing at the time. I didn't really know that much about memory techniques. And I met this guy, Alex Mullen, who was the second place finisher in the competition. And he went to Johns Hopkins, which was like right nearby. And I thought it was like really cool to meet this guy and meet all these other memory athletes. And just find that there's this whole community of people that were practicing techniques to improve memory, and that they were actually effective, because, you know, you hear about all sorts of like cool techniques that you can improve some area of your life, and like 95% of them just don't really work. Memory techniques was an exception. And I started to do training myself, and realizing that I could do all these things that I didn't think were possible. And so I would just start, and I'd be memorizing like numbers, for example, and memorizing numbers outside of like 7 to 9 digits, which is like the normal human digit span, just seems impossible. It's like, how can anybody possibly do that? And once I learned the techniques, I would memorize like in 5 minutes. I was like, okay, I got, 90 digits. And then I was like, oh, I could push that even further, like 180 digits, 300, 400. And I just kept seeing my brain achieve all these incredible things I didn't realize I could do. And so it was just a really cool experience that I've had both in memory and in fitness, and in other areas where you are able to kind of show yourself you can do something that you didn't think you could. And then there's this like a sense of excitement and mastery and progress that sort of comes from that. And so that's what really got me hooked on it initially. And that's what got me like interested in kind of like these competitions and these techniques, and kind of starting to use them myself, both for memory competitions, which I was interested in, but also for school. And so one of the things that I did was for French, which was a language that I was like learning at the time, I decided to apply my memory techniques that I'd learned to learn French vocabulary. And so this was like the summer of 8th grade going into 9th grade. And every morning I would literally, like before breakfast, I would just pull out a list of vocabulary words, and I would set a 30-minute timer, and I would like compete with myself to see how many words I could memorize and then recall in 30 minutes. And similar to the numbers, I started out and it wasn't that many. It was like probably like 100, 150 words in 30 minutes. Which it sounds like a lot, but it's like, it's one of those things where like once you understand how the techniques work and you get some experience, like these numbers sound like more normal and like normative. And over time, I'd push it up to like 200, 250, 300 words that I would just be memorizing and then recalling in the morning. And so I started with words that were obviously like more common, higher yield words that would actually come up with in an actual conversation, and also got into like more niche words in niche areas as I gained more and more experience and familiarity. And by the end of a month, I had racked up thousands of vocabulary words in French, which is just ridiculous. And I didn't think I could do that at all. And I just started to, like read in French and use these words, etc. And so it was really funny because I missed a year of French in 7th grade. In 8th grade, I was still like in French 1. And then I took my placement test in August because I was going to a new school, McDonough School in Owings Mills, Maryland. And I placed, instead of being in French 1 or French 2, I placed into French 4 honors at McDonough. I was like, oh, that's cool. And part of that was because the placement test that they had was like, please describe a scene. And it was like a camping scene. I remember it was a camping scene of like, there's mountains and there were sleeping bags and tents. And I remember during my French training, I had one of these like elaborate camping scenes in my book. that had every single thing labeled, and I memorized that for practice. And so when I was in my placement test, I was like, well, we can see them like here by their sleeping bag with their tent pickets, like holding up the line to their tent. So I had a lot of niche words that were like perfectly aligned, and they were like, what the heck? Like, how does he know all these niche vocabulary words? So I think that was part of the decision making. Was I had like specifically like learned a lot about that niche area in terms of vocab words, because I was using a book as well, which was like all about like describing different scenes with pictures and words. So anyway, I get to school. I'm in French 4. A week later, they moved me to French 5. They're like, this is not the right level. And at the end of the year, I end up in French 6. And then I'm just like, they're like, all right, you're just done with French. And so I end up taking the C2, like the fluency exam. And it turns out that I'm just fluent in French at that point. So that was like my first area where I was using memory techniques. And I think it was also it wasn't just the memory techniques though. I think it was also that the techniques were really fun, and there was like a competitive aspect to it as well that I enjoyed. Like nobody else in the summer was like taking out vocabulary words and seeing like how many of these can I memorize. And so I think it was both the effectiveness of memory techniques and the fun of using them, and like the competitive attitude about it that kind of drove me to experiment in the way that I did. And I think that's kind of what enabled that, as well as the effectiveness of the techniques. Like if I hadn't known them and I were just like studying like a normal person studies like on Quizlet or something, obviously that wouldn't have been fun at all, and I wouldn't have done that. Right. So I think it's both the effectiveness and also the fun of using it and kind of the related aspects. Yeah,
definitely. I want to put a couple things you mentioned into perspective, just since, I mean, you've taught me the memory techniques, so I'm nowhere near as good as you are, but I know how it works and I know how to do it. I have a lot of fun doing it too, but I don't think everyone understands like how it actually works. So when you're saying that you're memorizing 90, 180, 300, 400 word numbers in 5 minutes, that's the way that works. Is that there's software that prints random strings of digits. So exactly. So it's like most people struggle to memorize a phone number, which is 10 digits. You know, that's just above like what most people can remember easily. So you take that, which is a hard feat for most untrained people, and then you what is that, 50x it?
Yeah, exactly. And there's strategies and ways to do it that make it a lot easier, right? Obviously.
And then I also just wanted to put the words into perspective too. So you're memorizing as many words as possible in French, 30 minutes a day before breakfast, you're saying. And it's there, for me, when I started memory techniques, I really realized how like finite any language is. Like if you know 1,000 words of a language, like you can kind of get around. I know my parents went to the Peace Corps in Papua New Guinea, and the language that they learned there only had like 900 and something words. So that's not a lot of words. I know 2,000 words and you're like conversational. I think 10,000 words and you're fluent. And then like, I think it's like 80,000 words or something like that. And at least in English, these numbers I read a while ago, so they might be off, but they're ballpark right. But 80,000 words is like you're a researcher. You've been writing research articles for your whole life. So that's like those kind of people. So in a summer, how many words of French would you say you memorized total? Just from your 30-minute daily routine?
I would say around 10,000.
Around 10,000. So that's enough to get fluent. And you also started, what's brilliant to me is you started with the highest frequency words. So you sorted the words by the frequency of use in the French language. And so like the first 100 words you learned are the most valuable 100 words to learn in French. And you just kept going that way.
Yeah, I did it kind of blended. So that's what I did to start for like the first 2,000 words. But then I kind of progressed to using like these picture books that were extensively labeled with the different items. So then I could focus on like one theme, which I liked too, because then like the camping scene or like a supermarket scene. And so I did both. I started with the frequency list, but I also think there was like a benefit to doing it by theme, because then it's like you can kind of learn everything in a specific category. There's something nice about that too. So I did both, yeah, for sure. And also frequency lists. The one thing that was annoying about using a frequency list was that they have words in there that, depending on the list that you get, that will be kind of like filler words or words that are like obvious, that are like the word "the" will be like on a frequency list, or the word like "he" or "no." And so some of those you kind of have to skip over because like you already know them. But for the most part, I would say that can give you a really good like ballpark of where you need to be for the first like 2,000. And then once you're past that, I would say focusing on like topic areas, like a specific theme that's high frequency, was really beneficial for me because I liked being able to learn everything about one area and then kind of move on. So it was like, at least logically, it was kind of grouped in my head. So like for one day, I had the camping scene day, which is the story that I told, but also like a day like in a house, and then you learn everything in a house, and then a day in the kitchen. So there's different ways to do it, and frequency I think is really beneficial, like at the start, and then I think it's cool to have categories so that you kind of are thinking of things in terms of their meaning and like groups of meaning as well.
Yeah, definitely. Cool. And then, so I had a recent conversation with my friend AJ just a couple of days ago on this podcast. He speaks French and Arabic as well as English, and I was asking him a little bit about like, and I'll ask you the same sorts of questions. And the reason I'm asking these questions is since I learned Spanish to like a conversational level. I'm not fluent, but I can get around pretty well. Mostly I learned in Central America traveling throughout my high school years. But in my experience learning Spanish, like it changed qualitatively, like the way I think. Like I started thinking less in words and more in like concepts that, and I kind of think on a more sublingual level, and then the words just kind of naturally flow out. And I think learning Spanish helped me get to that place. It even translated over to English, where like I kind of just think of the concepts and I let the words come out rather than like thinking of the words and saying them. Yeah. So that was my personal experience where like it changed the way I think to learn a second language. It kind of made me realize that like within a language, there's certain key differences. The one I brought up the other day, I'll bring it up again now. It's like in Spanish, like you have hunger, you have thirst, you have tiredness. You aren't hungry. It's not like in English, I'm hungry, I'm tired, I'm thirsty. Yeah. And it's just like little subtle differences like that, which when I first started learning Spanish, I was just like, oh, like they use have instead of am in this context. And I didn't think about it. But after like spending time in Central America, I realized like there's these little subtle differences that actually like change the way people think about life. Like it's different to have hunger. It's not you, it's not part of your identity if you're not hungry. So it kind of separates it. And then, like the way I am, I start thinking, what are their cultural effects and why is it this way? But that's kind of getting into the weeds. So my question to you is, I guess, did you notice anything similar in learning French? Did it change the way you think? Did it change, your perception of the world around you? Did it change the way you interact in English?
Yeah, I think so. Definitely. Yeah. Specifically because all of my memories of French and all the things I associate with French when I start speaking French, naturally those memories are going to be activated. That's just kind of a property of the brain, is that the things that we're thinking of and things that we have memories associated with are going to activate other memories. It's called spreading activation. And so when I speak French, it's activating all these related memories that I have, both to my time in France and to learning French and to the context I was in when I was learning French. And so it'll bring back different memories as I'm speaking it. And then I'll start to kind of feel a certain way and be in kind of a certain mood. And I also, I totally agree with what you're saying about the distinctions that languages make, like having hungry or being hungry. And actually they do matter a lot. And it's kind of hard to say, like, if it's the chicken or the egg, in the sense that, like, obviously a culture being a certain way can then make them more likely to make a language that describes that culture, or the reverse possibility of they have a language and then that kind of creates the confines of the culture, which enforces certain behaviors. And so I think it's both. One example that's really interesting, actually, is there's a tribe in Africa, and they don't have a way to blame people or to label them. So like in the US, we could say, he's a jerk, or he's lazy, or he's bad. And they don't have those types of words because their communication is based more on needs. So instead of saying like, he's a jerk, or, he took my cow, he's like a terrible person, he's a jerk, whatever, they have to speak in terms of needs. And so the way that their language works is they'll say, well, I'm feeling like sad because I need a cow so that I can have food. And so when Jake took my cow, this is how I was feeling because these were my needs, and these are how my needs aren't being met. And so all of a sudden it's more about what I need rather than about turning Jake into a bad guy. And it totally changes the way that we think about conflict, because we're not putting the other person down by putting them in a certain box or a certain label, which makes it easier to kind of be negative towards a person. Like if you just say, I needed this and this is why I'm feeling this way, then it's not the same as making somebody into like some label, like a jerk or something like that, where then it's easier to justify doing something negative towards them. So that's kind of an interesting example where I think language influences and it decreases. There's very low rates of violence in conflict in this particular tribe.
I love that. And I actually want to circle right back to this, specifically the essential needs. I know you're kind of laying it out there, but just before jumping off the language, I have one more question on the language. And you kind of already touched on it indirectly, but would you say you have a different personality when you're speaking French than when you're speaking English? I've noticed when I'm speaking Spanish, like, I think my voice is a little higher. My word choice is different, and it's like I come across differently. And part of it's just like I don't speak as well, so like part of it I'm struggling to get it up. But even when I'm not struggling, I still have a different personality qualities. I'm wondering if you've experienced that with French.
Yeah, I think so, and I think it's partly the way that I learned French was literally like a computer learning French. It wasn't like an organic, like conversational way. So I think when I speak French, I do have an element of being different just because I didn't learn it in the most organic way. And I think that's something that I had to balance because I was learning so many words so quickly, and I didn't have a lot of chances to like practice them in a realistic setting. And so when I first got to France, because I actually went to France, I was able to kind of calibrate myself in so many different ways. I already had the pronunciation because I was speaking the language with one of my friends back in the US. But when I got to France, it was like, it definitely gave me a better sense of like frequency of words and like how to use certain phrases and all the subtleties, where I had everything in my memory, but it was like piecing it together was kind of what I started to figure out. And so I would say, yeah, it definitely, like, I have a slightly different personality, I think partly because of the way that I learned French and partly because like living in France, you're a part of a different culture. And that kind of brings with it a different set of beliefs and identity and everything else. Yeah,
for sure.
I would say even beyond that, like just traveling, I kind of adopt the identity of wherever I go to some extent.
And I want to come back to that thought on travel, but like I'm always curious with people who've traveled, like, and just having traveled myself, certain parts of me stay the same and certain parts of me change when I travel. And I just think that that's, but anyways, we'll come back to that. I want to jump back to the essential needs point that you jumped on, since that's interesting. And that was the topic of the children's book you co-wrote, correct?
Correct. Yes. Yes.
So just to before you dive in, what I'm curious about here is you were kind of talking. Essential needs came up in the context of language, and you were talking about this tribe. But I guess just if most of the people listening to this are going to be English speakers, so without going and learning a tribal language, like how can we take these essential need concepts and apply them just within English?
Yeah, absolutely. There's actually a method for doing exactly that, and it's called nonviolent communication by Marshall Rosenberg, and that's the subject of the children's book that I worked on with Chris Hartstein. And basically, what it reframes is thinking about things in terms of needs, and distinguishing our feelings, our needs, and our observations. And so that's something that's really hard for people to do. And to give an example is, let's say you did something that I wasn't happy about. Like, let's say you left your chair out in the cafeteria or something, and it was dirty, it was messy or whatever, and then you just left. And I saw that, and I was really upset about it. So the normal programming that we go through is we think, well, Jake is sorry, Jake, I'm demonizing you right now. Jake is a jerk, and he's terrible, and why would he do this? He clearly doesn't care about other people, and he's just doing this because he's selfish. I don't like Jake or whatever, right? So that's the normal programming, getting mad, etc. And with nonviolent communication, it starts with your observation of the situation and making it more objective. So if you think about my first example of Jake, you leaving, right? I'm already assuming why this has happened. I'm assuming it's because you're selfish or because you just wanted to go, etc. And I don't actually know that. I'm just a storyteller, right? So the first step is to try to make an objective observation, which is literally like a video camera. What does the scene exactly look like at that moment? And so that would be okay, I noticed that, his chair is a little bit further back than all the other chairs, and there's some food on the table. And just thinking that and saying it, all of a sudden you're slowing yourself down. You're bringing yourself back from this chain of storytelling that you don't even know whether or not it's true, right? So starting with that observation of just, here's what I'm seeing, right? And then once you make that observation, you're going to get in touch with your feelings. And so being upset, being mad, being frustrated, feeling kind of disrespected. This is all an internal feeling that you're getting in touch with, right? And so that's the second step, is thinking about your feelings. And the third step is connecting your feelings to your underlying needs. And so in this case, it could be a need I have a need for respect and mutuality and everybody in the community kind of doing their part to keep things together and in order, right? And I have a need for conscientiousness and cleanliness, etc. And so what this is doing is this is helping you to understand your feelings, not in terms of Jake and being mad at Jake, but in terms of what you need, which has nothing to do with Jake. And what you need in this situation is you need the cleanliness, you need the conscientiousness, you need all these other things. And the reason that you're upset isn't because you're mad at Jake, it's because your needs aren't met. So suddenly you have so much more power in this situation because it's about you and your needs, and it's not just about the other person or what's happened that's made you upset, right? And so it's allowing you to understand your emotions and understand the needs underneath your emotions. And then the last step of the NVC process is to, after you've observed, got in touch with your feelings, identified your own needs, is you can make a request. And so the request could be either to yourself or to the other person. So if it's like a request to yourself, it could be like, I'm going to, clean this up, and then I'm going to talk to Jake and just let him know kind of like how I feel. Or the request could be literally to Jake, like, listen, Jake, like, I know you might have been busy. I know you might have, really had to go, but like I have a need for these things. Like, I really value, cleanliness and everybody like taking care of their stuff. Would you be willing to like push in your chair and like put away your food next time? And so the request part is like, what do I want to do about it? What do I want to do about the situation? And usually if you go through the stages of observing objectively, getting in touch with your feelings, understanding your own needs, then the request that you make comes from a lot better place than the initial reaction of just how you felt without going through that process, which is usually just based on those emotions, and doesn't tend to go over well. It tends to just end in more conflict and disagreement between people. So that's what my children's book is about.
I love it.
Yeah.
It seems just like it's a logical framework to understand and communicate emotions. Is that a fair way to kind of reframe it?
Exactly. And it's not something that you have to like use all the time. It's not like I'm like, every time I have a conflict, I'm like, let me go through each step, because that's not really like how we do things. But it's good to have as kind of a tool or an idea in the back of your mind that you can kind of use this process if you want to tap into it.
I think just the first step of like recognizing like this is something I'm feeling and there's a reason I'm feeling this way. It's like, rather than just like feeling and reacting, like rather than just sort of blindly like being guided by your emotions, it's just introducing that extra step of reflection. And the NVC method is like, it's more in depth, like what you actually do with that reflection. But I think just having any type of reflection is really a huge thing that's important. Cool, man. So, you've done a lot of stuff. When did you write that book? Like when did that I'm always trying to tie things to the timeline.
When you're
in high school.
Yeah. So like 6 years ago.
And how did you come across the NVC method, and how did you meet your co-author?
So actually, it's kind of funny. The YouTube algorithm suggested a video to me about NVC, and so that was the miracle of YouTube. And so I watched a short video on it that had like 100 views. I don't know why it got suggested to me, and I was like, "This is great." And so I, and Googled, NVC, listened to a couple audiobooks about it, and then I found out that there was a meeting group like 5 minutes from my house, literally Bolton Street Synagogue. They're like right behind where I live. They had a meetup group once a month where people would practice and discuss NVC. And so I just started going to that. And then a couple years later, I like been to that every month, been really interested in it. And I was like, Chris was like, "Oh, I'm working on this book. Do you want to help out and work on it?" I was like, "Yeah, sure. Sounds great." Yeah. So the power of the algorithm.
Honestly, I found a lot of things myself that way, and I think if you ever get suggested a video with like 100 or 200 views from some random person that you're not subscribed to their account, like just always watch it, since the Google algorithm knows.
Yeah, it was like this old guy like, just in a forest just talking about it. I was like, "Oh, it's really interesting." Like, no views, no comments.
Amazing. Cool, man. So let's back up a little bit. We're talking about NVC, which for you was in high school, but I want to back up to your trip, your worldwide trip at 7th grade. And I think I'll maybe be able to relate a little bit to this. I took my first international trip before ninth grade, so I was a little older than you were, but that was when I went to Guatemala. I went to Spain as a baby, but that doesn't really count. And so a similar kind of phase of life, that middle school,
Yeah.
early high school time when, this formative years. So I'm kind of curious, A, what was your experience like traveling around the world? And then B, like, in what ways did that kind of determine your path after that trip?
Yeah. Wow. It was a big trip. There are a lot of different countries and stories to talk about. I guess overall, the main thing I would say is that I think everybody should travel, and I think going to different countries helps you to broaden your perspective and make you realize that the American way of living or whatever country you might be in is not
Mm-hmm.
the only way. And sort of by sampling different countries and areas and lifestyles, you get a sense that everybody thinks that they're living the right way, but not everybody's
Mm-hmm.
living the same way. And there's a lot of differences, and you can kind of explore different areas of the world and see what you like and incorporate that back into how you live. I would say, living in Uganda, for example, and being outdoors all the time and just having this really intense, vibrant lifestyle was like in many ways just awesome for me at that age. And the same with some of the other places that I went, and getting to sample like these different areas and cultures and learn so much about them was really cool for me. And I think what I alluded to earlier is I think I really have like a separate part of my identity that I can like shift to each time I go to
Mm-hmm.
one of those countries, because I kind of incorporated it
Yeah.
into part of me.
It
Yeah.
reminds me of what you were saying earlier. I forget the fancy term you used for it, but like the association, like when you're speaking in French, how it taps you into all those associations. I think it's the same for place.
Yeah.
If you go to one place,
Yeah.
there's what was the association term?
Yeah. So for place, it's context
Okay.
dependent memory. So wherever we are creates this context, and we have a lot of memories
Mm-hmm.
associated with it. One of the reasons why we pass by like Dunkin' Donuts, and we're like
Yeah.
start thinking of donuts. Yeah. About same thing for countries. Like once we're in the actual location, that's where we have all the memories associated, and also the behaviors and the habits associated with those places. Yeah. And so when I travel, I kind of go back and think about, if I'm going back to the same place, it kind of brings me back to that particular
Yeah, for
time
sure.
in my life. Yeah.
I know exactly what you're talking about. It's when I've traveled back to play. There's always times where like one song that I heard when I was in Costa Rica or something like triggers, all these memories of what I was experiencing at the time that I
Yeah.
never would have remembered. And it's cool, like having studied memory. I mean, you were my teacher for a while. I've kind of learned through working with you that like memory is all about associations. Like it sounds obvious if you just say it, but like it really working and practicing memory training, memory techniques myself, I like it becomes really obvious that like memory is all like any object in your memory, any concept in your memory is all like it's just based on all the associations you have to that concept. And so just like thinking about groups of associations as like kind of triggers that your mind can tap into, I think is pretty cool, and it's cool to hear you explain from that lens. All right, so let's go back to the timeline of things. So you've traveled in seventh grade. It was a whole year you were gone, right? Do you know how many countries, or at least how many continents, you guys stayed in?
Yeah. So we went everywhere, but Australia and Europe were the two that we missed. We skipped Europe because we figured we'd probably go back to Europe at other points in our life, and we also wanted to focus on countries where we felt that they would be undergoing a lot of change in the next few decades. So Europe, we thought, would probably look pretty similar in 20, 30 years. Obviously, that turned out not to be totally true. And with global warming, who knows what's going to happen. But we figured at the time, like, we should go to Antarctica. If Antarctica starts to melt, at least we saw it. We should go to places in Africa that are, developing and will probably develop a lot in the next 50 or so years. And we also figured it would be cheaper to go to those places, and also more different from the United States. So we could learn more and experience a little bit more of a difference in cultures than if we just went to a place in Europe, which would be obviously different language, different cultures, but more or less similar to the United States.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. So just I like, and I mean, you'll understand this, but to me, in these podcast episodes, the way I'm thinking of it, and I want to ask you kind of the loose structure of how the memory techniques work. So we'll get into that. But basically, there's two things in memory techniques to hold the whole system together. There's memory palaces and images. Memory palaces are kind of spatial representations of places you've been, and images are the way that you store information. So you take the images, you put it into the memory palace, and then you can kind of visualize it when you go back and recall it later. And the kind of analogy to how I like to structure this is that the timeline of your life is kind of the memory palace. That's sort of like the structure that we can tie all the memories to, the experiences you've had. So that's why I keep kind of coming back to the timeline here. But all right, so in middle school, you're traveling, you're getting exposed to memory, and then you come back, you learn French, the memory's starting to take off. You started taking clients in high school, correct, for your memory business? Can you tell me a little bit about that process? Like, what was that like? You're pretty young to be running a business, and it's different than a landscaping business. It's definitely a step up.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah. Yeah, sure. So went on my world trip, 7th grade. And then 8th grade, I got back, and I didn't start the business then, but I got interested in memory techniques. And then my 9th grade year, after I had done what I did with French, I started training people, and being like business minded. I was like, I'm gonna stop doing this for free. Like, this is I'm giving people really good information. This is a really high quality coaching session. Like, why don't I just start like charging people for this? Because it's a really valuable service, and they should respect that if they want to learn it. And so I started taking clients on my back porch. I was probably like 15 at the time, maybe a little younger. And I would just bring them, to the back porch of the house, and I'd have like a little session with them. I'd get all dressed up and show them everything that I knew. And I would give them these like highly structured training sessions in memory. And usually they were students at the beginning, but also some adults. And I think they thought that I was way older than I was because I'd have people who were like 40, 50-year-olds, coming back onto the back porch and like asking me questions about the house and about my life. And meanwhile, I was like, 9th grade, 10th grade.
So they didn't know it was your parents' house?
And so I had to like admit to that. Not at first. But there's like eventually you have to be honest. So I'll be like,
yeah.
Pretty young teaching these sessions. And like at one point this guy was training to become a sommelier. So like a wine expert, and we were memorizing different stuff about wines. And I remember he brought me as a gift these wines, which I didn't know at the time were like really nice wines. And so every session he'd bring me like another wine and be like, oh, here you go. Meanwhile I'm like 16, 15 years old. And the funny story was I had them like in the basement. I was just like stockpiling this guy's wines because I wasn't going to say like, no, like stop giving me wine. And I would bring them as gifts for like when my family and I went out to dinner. And I remember the first time, like people started asking about it because they were like, Leland, this is like a $300 wine. And you're like 15 years old. It's like, how did you get this? Like, how did you pay for this? Like, where did this come from? And so that was hilarious. And so it's like the funniest story just of like having my business running that on the side and then like bringing these wines to people. And that was a really great client, a really fun experience. And so, yeah, I ran it on the back porch, and it was also like, I wasn't super sophisticated at the time. I thought that I would just kind of be as prepared as I could and, you know, like structure it as best as I could. And people got a lot of value out of it. And I was actually very, very successful because most people just don't know about these techniques, and certainly not to the depth and nerdiness that I knew about them. And so I was able to work with people on all sorts of projects. And with Hopkins being so nearby, I had a lot of medical school students that I would work with as well. And I think one of the first signs that I was really like that this was really taking steam and this could be a successful business was I had one client who started crushing his practice tests for the step 1 exam in medical school. And all of his friends were asking like, how are you doing so well? And he told them that he was doing these sessions and it was really helping his memory. And I remember one day he couldn't come in person for whatever reason. He was just like in his room and he's like, I can't make it today. And so I'm on a Zoom session with him and I can just see his face and we're all animated. And I tell him, you know, like, all right, like, can you get out your notebook and your pencil? Because everybody has to have a notebook and a pencil or pen, right? And he reaches over and he knocks his computer screen like that. And the bunk bed of his dorm has like 15 people, like sardines, like taking notes on everything that I'm saying. And then below him on the bed, there's like a crowd of people like huddling, taking notes, like watching it. And I was like, at first I was like, hey, they're paid clients. Like I didn't know they were going to be here. But then I was like, wait, that's great. Like people really want to know this stuff. And the room was packed. And I was like, hey man, like you didn't tell me you had the room like full of people watching this. And then he was like, whoops, I didn't see that. All right, I'm back. That was a real confidence boost. And then I was like, all right, well, you know, I might be younger and I might not have like a teaching degree or whatever, but obviously if there's a room packed like sardines of medical school students, like providing something that works and that people want. And later he wrote me and he got just a ridiculous score on this test. And he like thanked me and he was like, I feel like I'm really, you know, like in a really good place because of how well I've done. And I felt like, wow, that's awesome that I was able to have that kind of impact. Yeah. That's a funny story. I haven't thought about that one in a while. That was a really good one.
That's pretty cool. How old were you for that story?
16. Yeah, I'd say like 16. I've been doing it for a while. I'd also been training teachers at my high school, and I had to stop because they thought it might be like a conflict of interest if all my teachers were like paying me to get these memory sessions while they were like teaching me history. So yeah, I taught a bunch of teachers at my school too who were interested in it, and that was really fun. And obviously, like my friends and everybody that I could like talk to, I'd be telling them about it, and like especially like the language department, I was like interested in talking like people who were interested in language. I was like, look, like this works.
Yeah.
Like, this is the real deal. Yeah. So those are some of my early stories. And I guess over time, I gained more skills. I became like much more sophisticated in my approach, and I was exposed to other sorts of opportunities. And yeah, so I'd say I started very early on the business, and then I gained like layers and layers of sophistication over time, pretty organically.
Have you ever done any marketing, or has it all been organic growth?
I have not done marketing, and I probably should do marketing. I think every business needs to have a blend of how well are you serving the current customer, how many new customers are you getting, how well are you acquiring new business, and then how much are you improving the quality of your service you're offering. And I think if every business can kind of balance those three, they'll be successful. And so for me, I would say I spent a lot of time focusing on improving the quality of the product and serving current customers to the extent where getting new customers took care of itself, more or less. That being said, I have definitely been looking for like a more consistent like process for working with people, because I've had periods where I've had like so many customers, like clients, that I don't know what to do with. Like, I'm like, sorry, like I'll see you in like 3 months. Like, and then I've had periods where I'm like, wow, where'd all those customers, what happened? And I think that's mostly because I've operated through word of mouth. And so like that medical school student that I was telling you about, basically his entire year, like got sessions with me. And so I'll have like word of mouth that will like go, and then like it'll come in these kind of fluctuations. But I think for me, that's been fine, because I have like been working on so many other things that I haven't pursued it as like a full-time business in earnest until I guess more recently. And so that's always been okay. And I've always been kind of like able to deal with that. I think like one of my things I'd like to work on now is like having more consistency with that and working more on LB memory specifically. But that's kind of how it's always been for me, in lieu of like doing more marketing and doing more of those sorts of activities. At the same time too, like your current customers are the best marketing for you if you do a good job, at least in my specific area. Obviously it doesn't matter if you're selling like a trinket, like a $3, like $1 trinket. It's like, just be as cheap as possible. But for me, I've also found that conventional marketing isn't really what I'm going for, because I don't have a product that is something that scales to the masses, like selling a bar of soap. I have a highly specialized, individualized training plan for people to improve their memory to the highest limit that it can possibly go to. And that means that for every client, I customize exercises every day for what they're going to work on. I look at their entire routine and I really try to understand and work with them. Just like a personal trainer would work with like Michael Jordan, to make him stronger and faster and think about his game. I do the same thing for people's brains. And so it's really focused. And so in terms of like marketing, I'm not trying to work with a lot of people, and I'm not trying to, have a product that I'm getting out to everyone. It's more of for the people that want it and they're really serious about improving. They come to me, and it's a very focused thing. And so kind of the mistake that, the marketing mistake that was like a trap that's easy to fall into is thinking like, well, more publicity is better. And, you want as many people to know about it as possible. But then you also have to deal with like maybe 90% or 95% of the people that, might be kind of interested. Maybe they aren't your ideal base. And so I think working through word of mouth, has allowed me to get clients who are genuinely interested in the full process, and they're kind of qualified by my my current customers to be people that would be really good fits. So that's been kind of my experience where I've been able to operate off of that.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's a premium service, and so I think like one good client is probably worth a lot more than 100 like potential clients. You just get the attention of the one person you actually want. It's like the value of the clients governed by the exponential curve, the power law, not the normal distribution.
Well, I think it's also too that I don't want to provide a shallow solution for people. So I'm not gonna tell somebody like, just do this and take this little, like, read this little ebook and we're done. It's like I really want to help somebody, and to do that, I'm going to put a lot of effort into it, and that's different from going to one class or going to one boot camp or doing one thing. It's really like a very focused process, and I get more value out of doing like fewer clients that I'm working with and doing a really good job than doing something that might be like lower quality that everybody access, with the exception of like coming out with courses and stuff, which obviously will be
right
for a larger audience than the individual.
Yeah. All right. I don't want to put you on the spot here, but I whenever I talk about memory with people, people are always curious how it works, and it's a pretty simple process. I think what really separates your business is the structure that you provide, and you kind of touched on that, but like you're very organized, you're very structured, and the details that you are looking for, the comments that you give for feedback are like very minute. You understand, like, you're really a true like master of the craft, where like just it's almost like the advice you'll give me when I was practicing memory was like, it's like a notion, you're not telling me like a thing to do. You're kind of telling me like a notion to hold while doing it to expedite the process, and so what I'm trying to get at here is I don't want you to memory is your business. I don't want you to give away your secrets or anything, but just as much as you're comfortable, can you kind of describe how the memory techniques work? It's hard. It kind of seems like absolutely a mystical thing until you understand there's like a system and it's a specific, there's a way, and I kind of touched on it earlier with the memory palaces, but you're the expert here. Can you kind of just dive in as much as you can?
Yeah, sure. I would say the first thing to know is that memory techniques are a way to use our brain in the way that it's designed to be used. And so we know that our brain is really good at remembering things that we can picture, at remembering stories, at remembering action, emotion, meaning, and our brain isn't naturally good at remembering like numbers or facts or figures in most cases, because that's not really what it's designed for. And so what memory techniques do is tap into our naturally really powerful memories by taking advantage of those characteristics like storytelling, imagery, emotion, action, meaning, etc. Right? So to give a simple example, you just think of like a number just off the top of your head.
Two-digit number?
Give me any number.
3-digit. 355.
3-digit works. 355. So 355, you just hear it, right? It's not attached to anything. It's not associated to anything. It doesn't have any action, doesn't have any emotion, doesn't have any meaning. And there's nothing about 355 that's like personally relevant to you, right? Whereas other numbers, you might have stories associated with them. It might be like the start of your phone number, or it might be something personal. And so what memory techniques are all about is converting something that doesn't really stick in your brain into something that will stick into your brain. So let's think about 355. So one thing that I could think of is like just a simple story is like 355. Let's say like you have $3.55 left in your pocket, right? And you can see the three bills, and then there's like two little quarters, and then there's 5 pennies, and it's just stacked up right on my hand, right? And so already you have a visual image, and we haven't even really done that much of a story, but you can see it. And so suddenly it starts to stick a little bit more. You can see each bill, you can kind of feel it, right? You can incorporate the senses, you can incorporate touch of all the money, right? And so now we could add in a little bit of storytelling to that, right? So this $3.55 is something that you got from your best friend, and it was the last $3.55 that they had for the day. And they said, you know what, you're going to take this and you're going to go spend it on something that's really important. And so you have that money, you're not going to lose it, right? And that $3.55 is like following you around, and you carry it with you and you put it out onto a table, each bill like that. And then you buy like a nice lemonade. You get your receipt. It's $3.55, and you drink the lemonade. And you're like, "Wow, that was great!" Thank you, Jake, for the lemonade. That was awesome, right? And so even there, that's not like a very advanced, sophisticated memory technique, right? That's just coming up with a little story, incorporating a little bit of visualization, a little bit of action, a little bit of emotion. Your last $3.55, the lemonade, a little bit of meaning, but already you're going to be way more likely to remember 355 than if you just heard it randomly and you didn't have those things associated with it. And so what I train people to do is, whether it's academic information, things in their personal life, whatever they want to remember and prove it, I train them to automatically convert information from the boring 355 that you told me into the interesting visual 355 that has a story associated with it. And not only is that way more memorable and it's going to stick with you for longer, it's also more fun. And I think that one of the reasons people love these techniques is that's a lot better than, opening up Quizlet and writing 355 and then going through your flashcards like 8 times until 60 year end, right? It's a lot more fun and more effective. And so that's like a little storytelling example that gives you a sense of the principles. I'll also touch on the Mind Palace because you mentioned it earlier. The Mind Palace is taking advantage of your spatial memory, which is naturally really strong, and attaching the imagery to your spatial memory. So to incorporate the Mind Palace into the story that we had earlier, it would just be to think about like, well, where is the place that you're getting the lemonade? Can you think of a specific place in your life where you're giving that lemonade to? And that'll be your storage spot for that specific memory. So like, let's say that's the gas station you always go to. Well, now the gas station is considered a Mind Palace. And so if you wanted to memorize a couple different numbers, you could have several stories in the gas station. So that could be at the cash register. You could also have another story that happens at the pump, another story that happens at a parking spot. And then at the end of the day, when you want to remember everything that has to do with numbers, you just remember, okay, the gas station has all the numbers that I need for the day. And then you go back and you think, oh, there's 355, 433, 988. And you can kind of pick up all those numbers that you left at the gas station.
Thanks for diving in. A little flavor I'll add in just from my perspective, which is like, you're the expert in memory techniques. I studied memory techniques with you for a couple months, like very seriously, about 9 months ago or a year ago. And then I've kind of pursued it on my own. I've kind of kept pace. I haven't really been pushing it, to be honest. But what I've noticed is that, like, what I love about the memory techniques is that the results are concrete. It's either you remembered it or you didn't. There's no gray area. Sometimes like you didn't remember it, but there's like a good reason why. That's about as gray as it gets. And I like all things like this. I'm into jujitsu as well, and I like that. It's like that there's just clean results. There's someone wins. It's to me the feedback you get, and especially like clean black and white feedback, it really makes it clear what works and what doesn't. So in practicing the memory techniques, you just basically mass remember information, whether it's French, whether it's a different language, whether it's just random numbers, decks of cards. There's all sorts of things you can use to practice, but basically just on repeat, you're doing these techniques, which there's a specific method to do them, and then you're seeing the results. And so pretty quickly you learn like about your own brain, like what is going to stick, what's going to resonate, what types of storylines, what types of images am I going to be able to see later. And then when you forget one, it's like, oh, yeah, it makes sense. Like, oh, I didn't really spin a good narrative with that one, you know? And so you really like just the feedback, and especially the volume of feedback through memory training. There's a lot more volume than like studying for a physics test or something like that. You know, a physics test, you're, you know, studying to answer 50 questions on a test or something like that. Memory, you could be memorizing thousands of images in just one session, you know? So all that volume, it really, at least for me, the thing I noticed is that it just brought me in touch with what works and what doesn't. And that kind of allows me to like take the concepts and run with them in my own brain.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
To kind of expand upon what you were saying, it's actually kind of funny. I whenever I work with a client, I will use the similar strategies to the client. So I'll use their same mind palaces, their same images, and I know kind of what's memorable and what isn't. And so sometimes I will, before they try to recall anything, I'll just write on a piece of paper, you'll probably forget this, this, and this because of this reason. And I'll turn the paper over, and then I'll get them to recall, and they forget exactly those things that I wrote on the paper. I say, okay, turn the paper over. They turn it over, and they're like, what the heck? And I'm like, I knew you were going to forget those things, because I know that, like, in this part of your house, you know, it's just not a good mind palace location. It might not make sense to people, but like I know that the principles behind like what you're doing is you're probably not going to remember. It probably won't work, and so that's kind of a fun demonstration that I give to people. And you're absolutely right. Like there is kind of a result that you can get, like a feedback that you can get that's really exciting to see. You know, this works or this doesn't work. And what's cool about it is you can kind of like do some experimentation and try to figure out like how to improve. And there are, I think, to expand upon like the clear result part, is that feedback allows you to kind of like gauge your progress in a way that it isn't always like possible or clear like in other areas of society, because there's like a specific way to train for it, and there's a specific like feedback that you get, and you know like whether or not you've done it right, and it's that's clear. That's all about it. If you go do totally 100 curls in the gym, you know, it's like you'll probably get stronger, but there's no way to know if you could have done it better. You know, all the results are gray. You know, there's no black or white results. So that's why I really like memory. It's very much like that. And same with jiu-jitsu. It's like you either got choked or you choked the other guy. It's there's no like cool, man. Quick time check for you. I know we're coming up on I can go a little longer, but I know we're only scheduled to go for a little bit longer. I want to see where you're at. Okay. Yeah, I've gotten on my side I've got about 30 more minutes till I have to run. Cool, man. All right, sounds good.
All right, so there's a couple things we haven't gotten into. One of them is fitness. You're a freak of nature on that front. I guess I'll kind of leave it open ended. What are your fitness goals? What are the means to get there, since you don't work out like other people I've worked out with?
I would say that just like right off the bat, your question about fitness goals is I don't have specific goals when it comes to fitness, and I don't really use that as a way to like focus my sessions anymore. I certainly like sometimes I do. Like
Hmm.
sometimes there's something that like some trick I want to get, like some stunt I want to do, and I'm like thinking about it a lot. But what I've found is just like the habit of working out and cultivating certain habits and certain practices uh, is a lot more beneficial than like having a specific goal, or at least for me in the results that I've gotten from my training. Because when I think of like a goal, right, you might think like, well,
Hmm.
I want to race for this particular race, and then once the race is over, it's done. Or people will say like, I'm going to try to get fit, for the
Yeah.
summer, and then whatever, I'll just lose the summer body. It's about right. I don't really have like a specific target. Like I really love working out, and that's something that I do every day. And so in that sense, I don't have a specific goal or a specific target. I just enjoy doing it, and it's more of like a routine or a habit for me. So I guess that's kind of partly how I would answer that. Because I really don't have like a specific thing, right? And I think that's not necessarily true for most people. Most
Hmm.
people will have like a specific thing that they're going for. But I don't believe that that's like necessarily the healthiest way to approach fitness. Because one of the things that can happen with like a fitness goal is like people will fixate on that, and I think then they can kind of
Hmm.
lose out like on a little bit of the process. And so I think I'll shift a little bit more and just talk about
Yeah.
like what the process of fitness is for me and like what excites me about it,
Hmm.
because that's kind of where like my attention goes to. I think for me personally, um, the approach that I've had to fitness has been to like enjoy progression and enjoy improvement and enjoy working on like the experience of like moving my body and progressing on a specific pattern or a specific trick without having like a specific goal. And that kind of sounds like it's like in tension with each other. Um, but it's kind of like as I work out, I'll get
Hmm.
inspired through the process of working out to like push myself a little bit further or to work on something. But it's not like I'm like sitting down like these are
Yeah.
my these are my fitness goals. Like I have to like work out this much or work out this hard. It's kind of like an
Gotcha.
organic process, I guess.
I'm wondering if maybe you do have goals. They're just more internal. Like you were talking about competing with yourself earlier in the context of learning French. You set that 30-minute timer and every day try to beat the previous amount of words you memorized for that
Yeah,
time. Is there any sort of and so
yeah,
that's in that your goal is to beat yourself. It's not to become fluent in French. So becoming fluent in French would be more of an external goal, whereas getting more words than the previous day is more of an internal goal. I'm
yeah,
wondering is maybe framing it in terms of internal goals. Does that because the reason I'm kind of picking at this is because like you're highly motivated when you're working out. It's like you're trying to get stronger, you're trying to get faster, you're trying to get better cardio. And I've seen that. And sometimes there's a reason. I know you play soccer and you do your parkour stuff. And so you're trying to progress on certain skilled things that require strength and conditioning. But I don't know, do internal goals resonate any better, or is it still the same thing if it's more process based, not goal based?
um I would say it's more
Mm-hmm.
like a
You just
habit
have to
or
do it.
internal thing. Yeah. Um, yeah, it's just like
Mm-hmm.
it's like not something I think about anymore. Because I've worked out. I mean, training, all sorts of things.
Mm-hmm.
I do it every day, like no matter what. Unless I'm like super sick or something. And so it's
Mm-hmm.
really like more of just like part of my lifestyle. And something that's like really ingrained. And that's something just about like habits it like takes away the decision making part, because I think like people will think about like, oh, should I work out or should I do this, and it's like I never have those kind of thoughts. It's
Yeah.
just like all of a sudden I'm like outside working out and like trying a trick. So I guess like ever since I was younger, like I have like always been interested in like parkour, like when I was first interested in like tricks and like pushing myself and like doing these different like stunts and stuff, that it kind of became a habit for me. So it was like not like a conscious thing, but more of just like, this is just kind of what I do every day. And like, I don't decide whether or not to like behave a certain way, or I don't get influenced like as much by something that's external. So I would say it's like, it's a mix of internal and like habit that kind of drives me.
Yeah,
in
definitely.
fitness. Yeah. Does that make sense?
I was going to kind of try to lead you down the habit trail a little bit. You kind of went down that way to some extent, but yeah, just what are your thoughts on habits? From a psychology perspective, since that's your area of expertise, but then also in a personal perspective, how do you integrate habits in your own productivity?
Yeah, sure. Habits are essentially helpful to take away that decision-making factor for an activity. They're not going to make the activity itself easier. I mean, the activity will get easier.
What would you say the value is in reducing that decision-making? Yeah.
Decision-making. It takes away any sort of like friction in the decision-making process that you might have over time, and it sort of lets things flow more naturally. I would say that's the main benefit, because it turns like a conscious process of like, should I do this, into kind of just a subconscious activity that you just do because you're cued to do it, or something that you normally do. And so I would say it takes away that extra effort to kind of like get yourself to do it, which is usually like the hardest part for people. Like, right. Like once you start working out, you're working out, like you're committed, you're not going to just like run for 5 minutes and then stop. I mean, you might, but it's a lot less likely that that's going to happen than, you're going to decide not to do it. So, I would say that's one of the benefits. Also consistency, like having a habit of doing something, makes it to the point where you're less likely not to do it than you are to do it. And so it's like establishing a default for something. And I think that's a major thing for me working out as well that's benefited me, is I literally work out every day. And so I think that like, yeah, there might be some days that like I train too much or like I train too little, but overall, like I'm not going to have a period where like I miss a month of working out. Like I'm not going to, so like there might be some days where, I do too much, but at the end of the day, like it's way better to have that habit of consistently doing it than to not have that in the first place and to like train sporadically. Like to give an example, like I have a friend who was getting into fitness the first time, right? And he was going on the stationary bike, and he went 3 days in a row. And then on the fourth day, he was feeling a little bit tired, so he didn't go. And then the next day he was like, I'm not going to go again because, it's just 2 days. And he ended up not going again ever to this day. And I mean, they're obviously like, this is just like a one case kind of example. But I do think that that's really real for people, and that there's a power of like consistently doing something and developing a habit that makes it a part of their life. And in this specific case, it's like, if I could have convinced him, like, like he should still go the fourth day, it's not because that day in particular is going to be like the difference maker for you in terms of your fitness. What it is it's that the habit of working out is more important to preserve than the specific result of that training session.
Interesting.
And I think that's something that people might overlook because they're focused on how fit am I going to get from this one workout, especially if they're new to fitness, when that's not the problem. Like they're not out of shape because they missed that one workout. They're out of shape because they don't have the habit of working out. And so convincing people to go every day, like this person in particular, I was like, it doesn't matter. This one workout doesn't matter that much in terms of the benefit to your body. What matters is that if you're doing it consistently, your brain is going to be conditioned to do this, and it's going to get easier to go to the gym. And that's way more important, like for your lifespan and your health, than whether or not you go this particular day. It's about the habit, not about the kind of the outcome of this one-off event. So that's kind of where I view the importance of habits, like in the context
I love that.
of
I remember
and
I work out pretty consistently now, probably not every day, but most days. But I wasn't always this way. I didn't really like working out when I was younger, and I kind of got into the routine. I was at 2 gyms. One of them had a basketball court. The other one had a climbing wall. And I would just go every day. And sometimes, at the time, I was into like powerlifting, squats and deadlifts and stuff like that. And so some days I would just be wrecked from the previous day. But I would just still go. And if I was too wrecked to go lift my weights like I wanted, I would just go on the climbing wall for a little while or go shoot hoops for a little bit. It was, and I know every day I can go shoot hoops. It's, even if I'm like walking around on crutches, I can still, it's still something I can go do. So it's just getting in there, getting that time, but building that routine makes a lot of sense. Also, I want to dig in a little bit more on what we were just talking about with the decision making in habits and how it reduces that. And this is me sort of like applying my intuitive observations and kind of wondering what your psychological knowledge might where you might go with it. But to me, like inhibition and willpower are somewhat synonymous. Inhibition is more of the technical term. Willpower is more of the colloquial term. And it's the way I think of it is like you have X amount, like you've a certain ability to control yourself and direct yourself kind of against your own will, and you can run out. So things like habits are like kind of hacks where you can basically lower the decision-making toll, the inhibition toll of like performing an activity. The first time you go to a gym, let's say you've never gone, there's going to be like, oh, I'm going to be nervous. Like people are going to be looking at me. I'm not even going to know how to lift the weights. I'm not going to be able to lift heavy weights. I might embarrass myself, So, and it requires a lot of willpower to overcome that inhibition and just go to the gym the first time, And then, but you go again and again and again, and it becomes a habit. And then you're no longer thinking about all those, the issues that plagued you that first time. It requires less willpower, it's just another day, to get after it. Does that resonate with what you like, with your more formal knowledge of, psychology? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, every time that we have a thought, any thought, there's a process in the brain, it's called myelination, where our ability to think the thought in the future increases. And it actually insulates with this fatty substance around our neurons in our brain, called myelin, where it's like insulating, just like insulating wires, where it's able to conduct more efficiently. We're able to think the thought more efficiently. And the same thing applies for a habit. The more that we do it, obviously, like the more you use something, the easier it gets to do that activity in the future. So I would say it definitely makes it easier to do the habit, and it makes it easier. I guess the key thing is, does it make it easy enough to do the habit compared to whatever you're competing with? And I think that's also a problem in modern society is you can make it easier and easier and easier to go to the gym. And that can be a super well-developed habit. But you also have to think about, like, for smartphones, right? That if it's competing with a smartphone, how well-developed is the smartphone habit? Because then in your head, when you're thinking about what to do, there's this competition going on where you've made it this easy to work out, but you've made it this easy. Yeah. I guess, like, don't pay attention to which way this is. You made it easier to look at the effort is reduced for your smartphone even more. And so that's one of the things that I think people overlook as well, is that they might have a habit that they've developed a lot, but that's going to be competing with an even stronger habit, such as a phone. And so sometimes it can be both a matter of improving the target habit, but also maybe weakening some of the other habits that you have that would compete with that target habit. because otherwise, even though it's as strong, you're still gonna default faster to your phone or your alternative activity.
Gotcha. So I was kind of thinking of
activity.
inhibition, willpower, in a vacuum, and you're kind of bringing, like, there's a relative component. It's relative to the competing activities. Interesting.
Yeah, it totally is. It totally is. Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that the major things of our society today is that corporations they've invested so much money and are continuing to make our devices and things that really don't matter that much very attention grabbing, very habit forming, to the extent where they are winning that battle between some of these other important things like fitness and spending time with family and some of these other really important things. They're winning, and it's a matter of like being conscious of that and being aware of how your attention's being pulled, so that you can make sure that you're doing the things that are actually important to you, so that you don't have these regrets that, like, wow, I spent so much time on my phone and I didn't do these other things, right? And that's because, like, even the tone, like the dinging tone that you get on your phone, it's heavily, you're well, same. Well, I don't actually use it, but I've like heard it a lot, obviously. That's been heavily researched. People don't necessarily realize that it's been designed psychologically to be like the most pleasing tone, and they will use, like, they'll get people to come in for research studies and they'll measure, how pleasing is it to hear this particular ding from your phone?
Yeah.
how nice is that compared to one of a slightly different tone, until they find, this is the best one to get somebody to, and they're not doing that kind of research for, like, how enticing is it to put on your shoes to go work out? Like, how can we like shake the shoes a little bit? They're not doing that. Yeah. Because there's no incentive to. So they make it a lot easier to pay attention to things that don't matter than things that do matter, and you kind of have to consciously fight back against that. Which is why one of the principles of habit formation is actually to increase the salience of those cues, like your shoes to work out. Like, put it somewhere super obvious where you will see it, and like put it somewhere where it is noticeable and make it easier to do, so that there's less friction to starting the activity, because starting is usually the hardest part. Yeah.
I often think of like the dopamine wars that's in like, they're all competing companies, and they're kind of, they can compete on price, they can compete on value, but the way I see it, more and more they're competing on dopamine, where they're just, like you said, they're making it easier and easier. Like McDonald's was the first place that you didn't have to wait, your food was just there, and then they made the drive-through lines. Now they're making the online ordering and delivery. It's just like they're reducing that barrier to entry more and more, and then marketing more and more. The issue, I think, with like the dopamine battles is, if there's a price war, eventually, like if there's two companies and they keep out underpricing each other, eventually one of them is going to run out of cash. They're going to be operating at a deficit, and whichever one has less cash is going to run out of cash first, and then the other one can reset their price to the industry standard and get more business, since they drove the other company out of business, basically. But there's no checks and balances with the dopamine wars. There's no, you went out of business because you were you were dropping the price too much. That doesn't happen. And so it's just like it's just a positive feedback loop where there's more and more incentive, and they're enticing you more and more, and we can kind of counter adjust. But like you said, they're never just like, there's never dopamine wars over getting your running shoes exciting to put on so you can go for a workout. It's always like the getting you onto social media, getting you into the fast food restaurant. It's always kind of these things that kind of take advantage of your health.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. And it's also another like related similar trend is part of those dopamine wars is people equate the dopamine that something gives them also with effectiveness sometimes, because if something's novel and new, they think, oh, this is a great product, when it's not necessarily. Like I went to this gym in New York that my father is a member of, and it's like super fancy and super nice, and they have all these new machines, and the dopamine's going crazy because you're like, well, how is this person working out? Like water, literally like water. They're like pushing water as a weight, you know? And so I know it's like, it's kind of hilarious. And they're doing that. It's like hydro workouts. And like, I get it. Like I feel the dopamine. That doesn't mean it's better, but I think people, when they see this variety, they think, oh, I'm going to have some sort of like special edge, or gonna, you know, what's the technique, that one weird trick, you know, like that scam, right? And they're all going for that, and they equate that, like they think that people think that it's a deficiency in knowledge or something new and exciting that's holding them back, because they're taught that by these companies, when it's a deficiency in behavior. And it's behavior that needs to change, not knowledge. And all the people in these gym, like not in shape, like they're not fit. Like he's like he's got a pot belly, but he's doing his like water. You're like, no offense to this guy, but like he's pushing water, you know, and he's out of shape. But he's like thinking, wow, this is so cool. You know, I've got like, I'm paying this trainer, you know, and I'm doing this fancy water pushing method, and I'm getting this dopamine because I think this is like this great thing. And it's like, no, like that's not how it works. Like what works typically is boring, it's hard, it's simple, you know, it'd be frustrating, like all these things that, like, because people never have to experience them in these like consumer experiences at these gyms, they think, oh, that must mean it's not going well, you know, that must mean that this is bad. And it's like, no, it's actually kind of what you need, you know. And so I was at this gym and I was talking to this guy, and he's like, because I was doing a middle split, I can do a middle split, and he was like, oh, you know, how do you do that? Like, can you show me like how you stretch? So like I give him this advice, and I'm like, you know, it's really hard. It took me 6 months. Like it's pretty painful, you know, like I just like basically tortured myself until I got this middle split. And he's like, okay, you know, thank you. That's great. He sends me a text like 3 days later. Just worked on the middle split for 30 minutes today. I could feel some minor improvements, getting closer or whatever. And I'm like, oh, you know, that's great or whatever. And then he texts me 2 weeks later, you know, just spent 5 minutes on it today, you know. I'm like, what is this? Like, that's not how it works. So he got all this knowledge from me on how to do it, but he didn't change his behavior. You know what I mean? And so that's just something that frustrates me, like just seeing that. And it relates to the dopamine wars, and it's equating that like knowledge, because companies sell knowledge and not behavior, we're conditioned to buy knowledge and consume knowledge. But it's not the problem. It really is not the problem. I'll give you another example. So there was a study that they did about health and healthy eating choices. And they had 2 groups. One group they made to attend health and food lectures once a week about, you know, like how to be healthy, et cetera. The other group, all they did was they told them, you're going to plan out your entire week, where you're going to eat, what you're going to eat, who you're going to eat it with, all these other things. The group that went to all these fancy, you know, lectures, PhDs, you know, here's how you eat healthy, compared to the group that literally just had these, they call it implementation intentions.
Was the goal
when,
for that
where,
group
how
to
they
be
were
healthy?
And actually
were there
thought about it,
okay,
and thought about their actual behavior to lose weight, both of them to lose weight. Yeah. The group that just didn't have any of this diet advice lost twice as much weight as the group that went to all these lectures and paid all this money to learn about how to be healthy. And that just shows you it's not the problem. So the group lost 4.2 kilograms versus 2.1 kilograms, which was in the education group. Literally no changes to like thinking about, oh, here's your food groups, here's what you need. Just sitting down, writing, I'm going to eat this on these days. This is what I'm thinking about to eat, etc. Because that's actually associated with action and the things that they're doing, not with just learning. And so that's something that, like, you can see I'm getting all like energized about that, but it's true because we have a knowledge economy. We seek knowledge, we're sold knowledge, we buy knowledge, but knowledge is not the full picture, and behavior is really important. And so those are just like some examples of that. And as it pertains to like fitness, as it pertains to memory, it really pertains to everything. And oftentimes the best thing to do is like the boring, simple, hard solution. And so instead of doing that, people like kind of buy these fake alternatives, and they buy things that make them feel good, but they aren't necessarily effective. Definitely true in the fitness industry as well. Like it feels good to do this workout that you think works, and you know maybe you'll sweat a little bit, and then you'll be like, oh, this is a great workout. but
It's
it doesn't mean it was
the guy spending $300 a month to go use the water machine is probably being outdone by like someone with a bucket of concrete and a stick that's doing squats. You know, yeah,
yeah. I mean, that's how I work out. I have a tree and I just like pistol squat it. I just do that. Yeah, it's like nothing is really that complicated. That knowledge is the problem. And there's actually like, you can think about, something I recommend doing is think about different categories of things that could hold you back. Knowledge is one of them, but it's also, what are your habits, routines? What's your mindset? Like, what is your level of motivation? And what are like the barriers to what you're trying to do? Like, there's all these other things that are ignored when we place the emphasis solely on like, there's a knowledge deficit, and that's why I'm not succeeding. There's other parts of the picture that people miss, and that's also part of my training with people. Is like, I'm not gonna focus isolated just on your memory here. We need to focus, and I need to think about everything, because that all adds up. It all paints this like bigger picture of who you are, what you're doing, how you're going to improve, what might hold you back. And that's just like a lot more realistic and a lot more effective than just giving people knowledge, assuming that if people knew, what to do, that they would do it.
right.
Because that's just not how the mind works. It's not how people behave. Yeah.
All right. I want to shift gears a little bit. I have two things I wanted to ask you about that I'm not sure if you're going to want to discuss. So, we discussed kind of off the record, but the way I have these podcasts, if there's anything you don't want to discuss, A, of course you don't have to talk about it. And B, if we do talk about it and then afterwards you don't want it in the final recording, you can always cut it out. But the first one is fasting. Are you okay with talking about fasting, or do you? Okay. So yeah, it's,
I can think about that. Yep.
I'll let you get into it, but can you, you had a fasting experience. You told me about it. And then years after you had your experience, I kind of created my own experience. So it's something that really kind of affected my life, but can you just talk about your experience with it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm going to just preface this. I'm not a medical expert, and I'm not an expert on fasting. So I can't provide in-depth advice like I could about like psychology or
just an experience. This is just an experience you had.
With that, and so bear that in mind, obviously. But this is just kind of a cool, interesting experience that I can include on this podcast as part of my life, like my life journey, which is that when I was in 10th grade of high school, going into my sophomore year, I had this accident, and I got this really bad concussion, and I couldn't read, I couldn't write, right? Terrible accident. And one of the cool things that came out of that, well, obviously it was terrible for a long time, and then I basically failed 10th grade of school because I just didn't have a functioning brain, was I actually stumbled across the practice of fasting, which is something that ancient cultures have done in ancient Greece and all sorts of ancient societies, which sounds kind of crazy to somebody who hasn't heard about it, because they assume, if we don't eat for like a couple days, we're just going to die, which is not true, which I found out firsthand. And basically the premise is, if you stop eating and you just drink water and you rest, it sets off a cascade of healing mechanisms in the body. And part of that is because we spend a lot of our effort digesting food from day to day. It takes a lot of energy. And so fasting sort of signals to the body, like, we're in a healing mode, we're in a healing state, and we're just going to kind of rest and recover. And so a particular experience that I had was that was really cool was to be in a position where there was considered to be like no like path to recovery for me from this injury that I had, due to the damage to
The doctors said
that had
brain
been
surgery
done
was
to
the
like
only
all
option,
these
correct?
different areas. Unfortunately, um,
Nothing. Okay. Wow.
that nothing was going to work. I could get a, you know, like a an injection that would like numb the area, but I know of like many people who had like a similar thing, and it was ineffective for them, and so just like constant pain um, in the back of their head, like lower quality of life, like unable to think, etc. I was actually like, it was terrible because I was really into memory at the time too, and I had like gone to a memory competition and just like
Hmm.
bombed it, you know, and like because I like couldn't do anything at all, so it was like I couldn't do any of my interests, I couldn't work out, and I just felt that like loss of freedom, um, and so I tried this fasting experience basically, and I literally was just drinking like water for like basically for like a week. It was about like 6 days that I did this, and by the end of it, I was completely healed from the injury that I had, which is crazy. I didn't have any symptoms.
Hmm.
I was able to turn my neck like all the way because it'd been like locked for so long, and all the scar tissue healed, and I was able to go from like not being able to read or write really much at all, or like
Hmm.
sleep, or like all these other issues, to just being completely healed. And so it was just a crazy experience to have, and I just felt so like just grateful,
Yeah.
like because I didn't think it was possible at all, and so it really
Hmm.
just like was huge for me in my life, and it enabled me
Yeah.
to like do everything else that
I remember you told
I've
me
done
about
since
it,
then.
and
Yeah,
I didn't at the time, like I didn't even believe like a human could live for 6 days without food. Like that shattered the same way like I didn't believe a human could memorize 100
yeah, me
numbers
neither.
in 5 minutes. You know, it just kind of shattered my perception of reality.
Exactly,
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah,
but can you talk
it
like
sounds
you
like a
kind of
scam.
just glazed over
Sounds
the
like yeah,
actual like
yeah.
experience of the fast? What was it? What's it like to not eat for 6 days? Like, what does that feel like? Where does your mind go? Um, yeah, how does that work?
It yeah, it's not fun. It's not like, woo, this is great. And you gotta understand, like, I was
Hmm.
also in a pretty desperate situation. I didn't have like a whole lot of options, and nothing had worked that I'd tried previously. So, um, I would differentiate like what I did with like what people do when they like do a fad diet, or now like when I did it, it was before fasting had become more mainstream. Now people are like, once a month, I don't eat for 3 days because I'm on a fast and stuff like that, and that they do this kind of
Hmm.
as a like a fad diet or like a regular practice to just like fast for these shorter periods, um, and that was not how like I approached this at all. Like I wasn't doing this like, oh, I'm just maintaining my weight or anything. I um, got a bunch of water, and I literally like the purpose was to try to heal from this, and I did not move at all, just to rest. And I just literally like sat and lay on like a mattress for 6 days straight, not reading anything, not walking around that much. I do a little bit of walk just to like get some blood flow going. But other than that, nothing. And that's a big difference, I think, to how people in modern society look at it, where they'll be looking just to like, oh, I'm just going to do a quick, fast, like lose a little bit of weight. It's not like that at all. And I don't really recommend doing it for that reason. It was very serious in my case, and it was just a lot of time to kind of like be with myself and um, I guess reflect a little bit, but mostly just to rest. And when you go on a longer fast like this, your body also kind of tells you that when you stop eating food.
Hmm.
The hardest is like the first couple days because you're like, why am I not eating food? And your body just keeps trying to say, hey, you forget to eat today. But after a few days, it starts to get the message, and then it's like it starts to shut down a little bit in terms of like wanting to do things, and it focuses more just on healing and resting. And you will feel a loss of like desire to do things, which is good as well. I think if I were like in a normal state, I would not have had like the discipline to like, I guess I probably would have because of the situation, but just to like absolutely rest like that, I think was a combination of like extremely high motivation and also your body just saying, hey, like it's just like an internal signal, like don't do anything, just lie here. You're getting better every day. And I could literally feel like in my neck, I could feel like crackling and sizzling of like the scar tissue. And then by the fourth day, it was just gone. And I remember just like moving my head because I was like in a cabin, like on my own. And I remember just like moving my head and being like, because normally it would stop like right there. And then
I'm an owl
going and being like, oh my gosh, I'm like an owl. Yeah, exactly. And my flexibility got a lot better too, which was weird. Like I was able to do, like I could do, like touch my toes, like all sorts of things that I just couldn't do. Because remember, I hadn't worked out for like a year, while I was going through this. I had a neck brace on, looked like a dog in one of those things. And so I was like, this is crazy. And I was able to start thinking faster. Like I didn't have this wall and I didn't have this pain. And then the other thing that happened was I couldn't sleep that whole year because I was in that constant pain. So once the pain went away during the fast, I was also able to sleep for the first time in so long. And so that started to help too, because I was suddenly like, I would go to sleep and I actually fall asleep. And so I remember I'd sleep like 11 hours. And then the rest of the time I'd like just like lay there and rest. And so I kept going, and then about the midway through the fourth day, like there was just I could feel a little bit was like still off, and I really wanted to wait until it was like, I don't feel this at all. Like I don't want this to come up at all. I don't want to feel this again. I don't want any of this. So I waited, and then going through the fifth day, you're starting to have like, it's like you're getting up and your blood pressure is a little bit off. You have to do everything like slower, which sounds really scary to people, but it's not. It's part of the process. It's it's natural. It's like you're not meant to be doing a lot of activity. You just have to take it slow. You just have to be really, really calm. And this is another reason why I get kind of like frustrated when I see people like advocating in the mainstream, like, yeah, just fast, like in your daily routine, do a workout, like while you're fasting to like increase the burn. And I'm like, no, this is not from my experiences. This is not what it's about. It's about resting, and
it's like removing all barriers to recover.
And
digestion is like,
so like around the fifth
maybe
day,
the biggest barrier to recovery.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. It's one of them. And there's more research coming out now. Even with like helping to cure cancer, by literally starving cancer cells when people go on a fast, and some crazy stuff like that. And so like the fifth day, I'm like, everything's kind of going away. And then like towards the end of the fifth day into the sixth day, I was like, all right, I don't feel anything at all of my symptoms, and I'm going to start eating again. So I started eating just like little bits of food, because your metabolism's super slow when you end a fast, and then you have to like gradually build it back. And I remember I took a biography of Napoleon. It was like 1,600 pages, because I hadn't been reading at all that year. And I just read it cover to cover, and I like the whole thing. And I was so excited about that. And that one day, and I was like, wow, that's just like a new sense of freedom. After I got out of that. And then I remember running down the beach like a couple days later after I'd read that, and I just felt like I could run for hours. And that's another thing too that was crazy. Like running, people think of running like it's all about like, like working out and like getting stronger. Yeah. But it was like I could have run for days after that. because I was in such a state of like health. I feel like my lungs, my heart, my body, and I was so light.
Mm-hmm.
I could have like run and just never stopped running on that beach. And so I was just, I remember I just went back and forth, like, and it's like, it just felt effortless. And I was just light, like sprinting back and forth. And I got everything back after that. And going into my junior year of high school, it was actually like really weird for people and like my friends, because they'd gotten so used to me not being able to do things and being at like 5% of like my capabilities. So it was like people had to adjust and like learn again, like this is what he can do, how he can operate. Like you don't have to treat him that way. Like he can do all these things again. And so like my like teachers and everything like were just like confused because I was like from like failing, and then it's like straight A's, A plus, like perfect grades. And what that also showed to me too, kind of on like I guess like a sadder note too, is like our society is like largely based on and like rewards like our ability to do things. And I guess like that was kind of a I guess gut check for me as well, like going through that whole process, because it was like going from a point where like I really was like at 0 and then being back to 100 and like making that transition. It was hard because it was like I got so much back, and I received like I like made so many new friends and like got so many friends back. And it also was like, I don't know, it was tough to realize too that like how much you lose when you can't do certain things. And you also realize how much certain friendships are dependent on being able to do certain activities and being able to like perform in a certain way. And I guess that's just like, that's how life works. But there was a part of me that was like, kind of just like, I guess sad, or just like, I don't know how to describe it. Just like surprised to realize that like a lot of my like people's identity and self-worth and how they value others is dependent on like how they can perform and how they can like how well they can do at things. And so it was kind of weird for me to like see how differently like I was treated, and like how much the world changes to like go through these extremes. So it definitely took me like a while to kind of like adjust in a way back to being like, this is my place in the world again. And this is what I've been through, and now I'm here. And, it was just a wild experience to kind of feel like I'm to feel like you lose that part of yourself and then get it back. And like, just it kind of like comes with relearning that.
I had a similar.
It did take me a while to kind of like recalibrate, I guess.
I had a similar experience. Just
so that was my experience with.
I guess it's kind of ability is what you're talking about, like the role ability plays socially and academically. But for me, it was third grade. I tore my ACL. And I was always like sports at every recess, and that was a baseball guy, and that sports were a big part of my identity. And I just remember like being shocked how much like my social life depended on my knee. It's just that I lose the knee ability, and it's all the social opportunities kind of went out the window for a while. For me, it was a little different since coming back. I eventually got a surgery, and then it was like 9 months like gradual recovery after the surgery. So like it was. People kind of got used to like, oh, he's on crutches. Oh, now he's limping around. Now he can walk. Now he can run. Yeah.
That was 1 in 5 case in his boot.
Yeah. I was definitely pushing it. But for you, it was a little different since you 1 week you were concussed Leland, the next week you were healed. Yeah.
It was really, really fast. So the psychological part, like,
and
I couldn't really keep up with the physical change. Yeah. And I totally relate to what you're saying in terms of your knee. And you're like, am I really just like the health of
is it all hinging on that ACL?
Is that really like, am I just like, am I really just the face the
Yeah.
defining like part of me. Like if I don't have this little bone down here, like I'm what the
all right, I'm gonna have to run in a minute, but
yeah.
the one more thing I wanted to ask you about, and again, I'm not sure if you want to get into this. Reason being, you brought it up one time when we were hanging out a while back, and I don't think it was a super serious comment, but it was one that just sort of like stuck with me. So I don't know if you still resonate with it or whatever, but I remember one time you suggested that there should be a 100% death tax. And I remember I heard it and I was like, no, that's crazy. And then just for whatever reason, like it still is on my mind, like a year later or whatever. It still occurs to me every once in a while. And the more I've thought about it, the more it kind of makes sense. But I don't know. First of all, is that something that still resonates for you? And kind of what is your thinking on that? Just you brought it up, and I remember we talked about it a little bit, but it just sort of came and went, and then I keep reflecting on it. So that's kind of why I wanted to ask you about it again. But yeah, dive into that.
Yeah, I mean, I have many like my own beliefs that don't necessarily have a lot of like popular momentum behind them, and that is one of them. It's funny you still remember that. Yeah, yeah. The idea being that like we should, we should just give everything back after we die, and then that would help to like contribute to like equalizing society and making it more about like what you make out of your own life rather than like what's given to you.
Yeah, I got you.
Yeah, so that that was kind of the premise behind it.
Yeah.
I guess it's pretty much as simple as that. Yeah.
Other than the financial, do you think there's like a behavioral advantage to the next generation, the generation after, like to I don't know, to dive into that a little bit maybe?
Yeah, I mean I think like having the knowledge that you aren't like keeping things after you die in any way, shape, or form could potentially impact how people behave in the way that they think about their future and the way that they plan for it. Certainly, knowing that it's kind of all going back into like a shared pool that everybody kind of starts out with their own things. And I know it's not like a comfortable idea for people to think about because everybody's attached to the things that they have in their personal like histories and their family history and legacy and where they live and houses, etc. So that is like one area where like I can understand because people have that personal attachment to like where they grew up and like certain things about that. But I think like aside from like those sorts of like complications, I think like just generally that our society would benefit from having like something like that where it does kind of align more closely with the sense that like we have an equal, like more equal opportunity. I was not equal because it's very to achieve that, but at least moving in that direction. I think it's an interesting idea. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm by no means like I haven't like analyzed.
And I'm kind of putting you on the spot by bringing it up since it's
negative
something
side
you
effect
sort of brought up in jest like a year ago that never came up again. But I thought it was interesting, and I guess my last question on this, I kind of stuck on it. But like, let's say that you were a multimillionaire. What do, like in your just you personally, how would 100% death tax change your behavior during your lifetime? Like what do you think you would do differently, and how do you think that would impact society?
Well, you wouldn't be able to like give all of your money to your kids after you died. It would go to everybody's kids in the future. So you'd be more worried about, I would think you'd be more worried about like more public goods that improving the country as a whole, because you wouldn't have the ability to like isolate yourself and just try to improve your slice of the United States. So I think people will be more invested in everything being good, because everybody would have a stake in it being good, rather than people being able to isolate themselves and saying, well, I don't really care how, our playgrounds look. I don't care how schools, I don't care how these things look, because I'm just going to spend $8 million and, live in my gated community and not worry about that. So I think that's one thing. And, people don't like public options compared to private options, because obviously those public options aren't going to be as nice as like the billionaires, version of it. But I think that they would be better, if we didn't really have like billionaires or like families of billionaires. Maybe there are billionaires that are able to become billionaires, but not like long lines of like billionaires. I just don't think that's necessary at all. Yeah, I don't think that it is. So it'd be a lot more incentivized to
I think so too.
Create a program.
It's like, would you rather
a broader community
have your money help people after you die when you can't see it, or would you rather spend it while you're alive and then see the effects of that money?
Yeah, and I'd add to that too is like one thing that we do know like from psychology is that when people are like directly affected by an issue, they're a lot more prone to do something about it than when they're indirectly affected, right? Like there might be a war going on, overseas in Europe, and we care a lot about like Ukraine, for example, right now. We're very invested in it. But as soon as like anything happens to like an American or something that feels like it hits close to home and it gets personal, then that changes behavior completely. That's like a whole different decision-making space for people. And so I think like with a lot of issues, same thing with global warming, like right now it's very abstract. It's not really affecting people directly. As soon as somebody can't drink because they run out of water, or they're like, they feel a direct impact, then that's when people's behavior changes the most, because they themselves feel it, not in an abstract way. And so to tie it into this particular idea would be that like everybody is directly feeling the consequences of everything else, because there isn't the ability to isolate and say, oh, well, I'm, a billionaire, so I don't really care about these issues because it's not going to affect my kids and it's not going to affect anything in the future beyond me. So I think that's kind of how I relate to it.
Yeah,
it makes it so that everybody's affected by everybody else more, because they don't have the ability to isolate themselves and they feel those effects. Yeah. Just like if there's like a public park or there's like a park near you and like, somebody litters, like it's like everybody feels it. They're like, oh, I want to clean this up, etc. It's like we need to think about that more in terms of our whole country, so that it feels more like we're directly impacted by each other's actions.
Yeah, man. Again, that's I don't really know what I was hoping to accomplish by bringing that up, and also I don't really know how it's related to it's all related to like decision making. I think everything we've talked about is about decision making and trying to make healthy decisions, and how do you develop systems, habits, and in this last part of the discussion, incentive structures to maintain the kind of just a healthy balance. Cool, man. So I have to get running, but if people watch this and they have memory questions or psychology questions or something for you, what's the best way for them to find you? Okay. There you go. You got the shirt on right there.
Definitely go to my website, lbmemory.com. That'll have
Yeah.
yeah, got a little branding. Yeah, check that out. And there's like my information's on there. You can contact me.
Sweet. Yeah.
About anything,
Yeah.
memory, fitness, parkour, chess.
Sweet, man.
Soccer.
Well, I honestly wish we had a little more time. I feel like
yeah,
we could go for another hour, and
for sure.
things would kind of start to you know, the themes would kind of show themselves a little bit more. But this was a really cool discussion, man. We touched on a lot. It's a lot of interesting stuff here.
Yeah.
So, super glad that you were able to make this work. Really appreciate you coming on to the show. Yeah, man. All right. I'm gonna end
Awesome.
Yeah, I'm gonna end this recording.